Welcome back to another video. Today's video we're going to talk about sled setup and specifically our front suspension. I want to discuss the difference between stock suspension versus upgraded suspension and how that plays a difference in how your sled handles on the snow and your overall experience with riding. So let's get into it. Now what I have in front of you is the stock KYB suspension that come off of a Gen 4 Summit X Expert and the Fox QS3 Coilovers. Now, there is a significant difference between these two shocks and the performance of both of them. All right, let's talk about the three main attributes that suspension have that play a part in the handling of your sled. The first thing is going to be your compression. Compression is the compression of the suspension, or in this case, the ski to the chassis. That's going to be the first thing. The next is rebound. That is how quickly the rebound happens of the compression cycle. So we also have the ability to adjust that. The next thing is going to be your spring rate, or how much tension the spring has on the shock to create that resistance between the ski and the chassis when traveling on the snow. Okay, the first thing we're going to look at is the stock KYB. We're going to talk about compression and spring rate and how they play a part. So spring rate, I want you to think of spring rate as something, it's a very simple concept. It is the stiffness of the spring. So a higher spring rate is going to be a stiffer spring, a lower spring rate is going to be a more loose, or I guess limber spring. You're going to get a little more travel out of it. And why is spring rate important? Because spring rate right off the bat determines how the sled sits and how the sled will act as far as the compression stroke grows. Now, what is compression in relation to spring rate, right? If we did not have the shock portion and just a spring tied to the sled, we would be very, very bouncy. What the shock does is the shock limits how quick the compression and the rebound happen with your current spring rate. So I hope that makes sense to you guys. And basically what we are talking about here is this going to be adequate for what you're riding and the type of riding that you do? Now the last thing we want to hit on is rebound. Now rebound, once the shock compresses and you get that compression of the spring and the shock itself, rebound is how quickly that will come back out. So if we had no rebound on there, it would be bouncy. Same with compression. If we had no compression, it would be bouncy. There is an oil chamber inside here with a piston that moves up and down as the suspension compresses. And that's what helps you to have a nice smooth ride without having your suspension just be like a pogo stick. All right, now what I have in front of me is the Fox QS3s. Why is this so much better than the stock suspension? Well, first off, it has a piggyback reservoir here that helps you to adjust your compression on the fly. Now, compression adjustment is important because we can do what we call a lockout on this, where we basically make this suspension so it doesn't compress hardly at all. Very stiff, very nice for jumping, very nice for a lot of side heeling circumstances, and everything that I'm talking about applies to the rear skid just a little bit differently. And we have three settings with this. So we have a setting 3, we have a setting 2, and we have a setting 1. And what that's going to do is that's going to change how this shock reacts on the compression stroke. So you're going down the trail, you're really bumpy, you're bottoming out, you can go ahead and you can turn this to 2, and that will help stiffen that ride up just a little bit. Now, say you're in deep powder, you want this thing to move a little bit more, you want the sled to be a little bit more playful, go back to 1. In the case that we're side hilling some very, very technical terrain or something like that, a lot of guys have their own preference on what they want for suspension setup. But what I've found after riding other people's sleds and after having very weak suspension on the front end of my sled, I prefer a stiffer setting. You can go to 3 or run your 2 and get more controlled feel out of the front of your sled. So huge benefit to having this. And I'm going to show you guys here in just a minute how that reacts when we're actually on the sled. It's easy to talk about, but you guys want to see how it actually works. Okay, the next thing, at the bottom here, we also have our rebound adjustment. Now, rebound adjustment is important. Think about going through a whooped out trail or something like that. That's the best example I can give you. And your suspension compresses and rebounds super fast. That can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing. But if you want to slow that rebound down so that sled kind of floats on those whoops and that suspension's not bouncing back and forth really quickly, you can slow the rebound down. So as that shock compresses, it won't rebound as quickly anymore because we are changing the oil flow on the rebound stroke. So again, we've got a compression stroke, which is the compression of the shock. And then we've got the rebound, which is the extension of the shock afterwards. So adjustable rebound is important. And again, these are 3 settings on this. You've got a firm, you've got a middle, and then you've got a soft. So super adjustable. You have 3 different settings per end here, which ends up giving you a lot of functionality. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is preload, suspension preload. And what that is this threaded portion of the shock where we can adjust the spring rate preload. Now, what is preload and why is that important? Well, when we get our suspension from whoever makes it, the manufacturer or from Skidoo or whatever it is, they specifically set the sled up with a certain spring rate based on the average rider. I'm running the Fox QS3s and I am excited because now I have this spring rate kind of set in the middle. I'm going to play with that, and what that does is that adds a little bit more tension to the shock beforehand. Now, I can extend this almost all the way up to here, and that will give me a looser ride and a looser spring right off the bottom. And what I mean off the bottom is that initial hit is still nice and plush. As I make this spring rate tighter, or as I change this preload, that makes my suspension more stiff right out the gate. Now, for the type of riding I do, I'm going to go with this mid setting, see how I like it, and we'll go from there. We'll play with it, we'll make adjustments, and we also have a compression and rebound to help with that, where the stock suspension has none of that. All right, now we've hit on a lot of things. That was a lot in a matter of a few minutes. But I want to show you the difference between the Fox and the KYBs, okay? As you can see, the spring is much larger on the Fox and it is much longer. We have more adjustability with the Fox than we do on the KYB. The next thing is the KYB is not adjustable at all. So we don't have any control over our compression, any control over our rebound. This is bottom of the barrel, the basics. This is what you get when you buy, the lower end package sleds. Now, the new Skidoos are coming out with 5-position shocks on them. The KYB, I think they're the 40s. They are nice. They're nice. They're very nice. And they can be rebuilt and all that stuff. These, not so much. And you're probably not going to want to spend the money to rebuild these or, to keep them. Go ahead and invest in some good suspension. Now, the other nice thing about investing in suspension is if you're running a Gen 4 or Gen 5, most of these will carry over to the next sled. All the Gen 5 suspension carries over to the new Gen 5s, the 25s. All the Gen 4 suspension carries over. What changes which shock you can transfer over to which sled is going to be your width of your A-arms and the distance that is required to run that shock. One other thing that we haven't hit on yet is a sway bar and what a sway bar does. So right now on this sled, there's a sway bar link right here, if you can see it. And what this sway bar link does is it connects this lower A-arm with the other A-arm on the other side. And so it's just like the sway bar on your vehicle. As your suspension collapses, or as it compresses, we should say that's a better term, this A-arm will come up. This bottom and upper A-arm will come up. And by having that sway bar on there, that gives it 2 things. That allows this to be stiffer and this shock to be stiffer all around, because you're relying also on the stiffness of the other side, being that they're connected. That allows this to have a little bit more bottoming resistance and a little bit stiffer feel. The other thing that it does too is it actually helps with keeping things more stable. You technically do not have an independent front suspension. You do to an extent, but because the sway arm is linked, there is a difference in how that would act if it was unhooked and this was able to do its own thing without the resistance of the sway bar. So the sway bar helps a lot on the trails. If you ride trails all the time, you're running a trail sled. Obviously, this is different than for us backcountry guys that ride the powder and off trail. But running a sway bar on the trail is amazing. It helps out with everything, handling, tipping, all that stuff. And you're able to run at a lot higher speed. Now, in the backcountry, when we're riding off trail, We necessarily do not need that sway bar link, and that's all personal preference. Again, I'm not here to persuade you to run a certain suspension setup. I'm just here to talk about the differences and what that does. But I've run a sway bar on this sled since I owned it because I had the stock KYBs on it. Now that I'm going to run the QS3s, I'm actually going to disconnect that sway bar and I'm going to play with it. I'm going to see what I like, whether I like the sway bar connected or disconnected. Okay, now I want to show you the difference between running the QS3s and running the KYB on each side. Now right now, the sway bar is connected. So even with the sway bar connected, there's going to be a massive difference between how it reacts. Now this isn't a very scientific test, but this is a test that will work well enough to kind of explain to you guys the benefits of running an aftermarket suspension compared to running the stock non-adjustable suspension. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go from one extreme to the next. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn the QS3s to setting 3, which is going to be our stiffest setting. And what I want you guys to look at is as I collapse the suspension on this side, look how much it travels and just kind of judge that based off of the other side. So I'm going to tip the sled on the right side first, then I'm going to go over to the left and do the same thing, and you're going to see the difference, okay? So as I compress this, okay, I'm just going to use the same type, or basically the same amount of force on each side, or try to, so you guys can see the difference in the travel and how the sled acts. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull down and I'm going to try to collapse that. And I'm only getting about half of the travel that I'm looking for on this sled. Okay, now we're going to go to the other side and I'm going to do the same thing. Again, I'm going to try to apply about the same amount of pressure, okay? And you can see how much further the sled collapses on that side. So significant difference between the KYB versus the Fox. Now, if I go ahead and loosen the Fox up and go to setting 1, we'll do that now. Now when I do the same thing, and again, not very scientific, but it'll prove the point, you can see how much further the sled collapses. Again, I'll go back to the other side now. It'll look a little bit more even. And I can feel that it doesn't take me near as much pressure on this left side to collapse the suspension. Now, if I were to disconnect the sway bar, it would be even worse. Okay, now what I actually just did was disconnect the sway bar. I want to show you guys the difference, okay? I'm going to go back to 3 on the QS3s. And again, no sway bar connected. So let's see how the sled reacts. Okay. It's pretty stiff. It's really stiff, actually. I'm putting a lot of force into it. Now, let's go over to the stock side. See what happens here. I mean, that is an insane difference. The whole sled is moving. I'm just going to hop on it. Okay, right side, left side. I mean, that's a big deal. My sled keeps moving around because I'm on rollers. But I can confidently say I can run the sway bar disconnected on this sled now. And I'm not going to have any problems with my suspension being too soft. Again, KYB side. That is insane, insane. All right, guys, now I've already shown you that I installed a QS3 on the one side. We're gonna go ahead, pop this right side off, which is actually the more difficult side. And we're gonna put the QS3 on it, and then we're gonna be fully set up for the year running this nicer suspension, this performance suspension. So now, first off, you wanna jack your sled up in the air and get all the pressure off the shock. And then we're gonna take our 12 and our 13 millimeter wrench and pop our lower shock bolt off. So the nut on the back side is a 13 and the bolt is actually a 12. So, oh yeah, that thing's stiff. Go ahead and pop that off. Just like that. And if you guys are interested in this Milwaukee ratchet that I'm using, this thing's amazing. I will link it down below in the description. Get yourself some good tools. It makes your life a lot easier. Okay, now we can go ahead and lift up on the control arm and wiggle the bolt out just like that. And then don't forget your spacers and your nut. Okay, now I'm gonna move the camera and position you in more up here. First thing we wanna do though is remove our side panel here because we have to have it off in order to access the bolt. Okay, so as you can see at the top there, the nut is on the outside, and then if you come over here, the bolt, focus camera, focus, is going to be right there on the inside. Oh, maybe you guys can see that right there. Kind of hard to see, but it's right there. Now, like I said, the bolt head is going to be the 12 and the nut is going to be the 13. Okay. This is where it pays to have a good ratchet that has a lot of teeth on it, because it allows us to loosen this up. Okay, I think we're pretty much there. Take our nut off this side. And the QS3s are directional. You have a left and a right. You cannot interchange them, so just remember that. Okay, there's our nut off. Put it right there. Lift up on my shock just slightly. And try to pull this out without dropping this bolt down in the chassis. That would not be fun to have to fish out. Grab my needle nose pliers to help me here. That's why I'm showing you guys on the hard side, because the easy side's nothing. Okay, I got the bolt all the way out, but because I had my needle nose, I wasn't worried about dropping it. And then, ooh, come on now. There we go. And there is the stock KYB. Okay, now just to help me, I jacked the front end up just a little bit, and I think that will give me the clearance I need to get this new Fox shock up in here, no problem. Rotate the bottom just slightly. And, oh yeah, money in the bank. Use your pliers to put your bolt through. Don't drop your bolt. There we go. Our nut on this other side. And to be totally honest, I really don't know what torque is on this, but it's a 10mm bolt, so 8mm, 10mm, something like that. So you torque it around 30 foot-pounds or something, it should be just fine. Okay, top one's tight. Okay, bottom one is easy. Just lift your A-arm up, align your bushing with your hole, and then put the bolt through. Whoop, not like that. Put the bolt through from the front. There we go. Just reverse. The nice thing about this ratchet is once you get it snug, you can just use it to kind of torque it down to final spec. And there we go. That thing's installed. Okay, I've got the sway bar disconnected, but this is just a test I'm doing here. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. I'm on the 3 setting. I'm gonna go to the 1 on both of these. And when you adjust these, make sure that you adjust them both at the same time. Look at the difference there. Huge difference between lockout or 3 and 1. Now we're on 3. Massive, massive difference, and the exact reason we did the upgrade. Okay, a couple thoughts on closing here. Again, this video was not to convince you how to set your suspension up, but to convince you that upgraded suspension, aftermarket suspension, is worth it in the long run, especially as you get better on your sled and get to be a more technical rider. Now, with that being said, how can you get aftermarket suspension? You could obviously buy it from the manufacturer that makes it directly, which is going to be your top price. Most of the time, and my scenario here, you can get on Facebook Marketplace, you can get on your local classifieds, sled or swap meet, things like that on Facebook, and you can find suspension. So the Fox QS3 front suspension is about $1,600 brand new. Air suspension is a little bit more. Now the difference between coilover versus air is adjustable on the spring rate because you can change the air pressure in it. So even more adjustability there, hence the price increase. Now, I picked up this set for $700, $750 from the guy. 1 year used, and again, brand new, these are $1,600. So be on the lookout, find yourself a full setup. This is just the front that we talked about today. Rear skid also has 2. And so you're gonna wanna make sure that if you upgrade the front, upgrade the rear. Make your sled handle the best that it can out the gate. Don't be like me, don't wait a year and then go to it and run this stuff right here. Not a fan anymore. Once you've ridden a sled with good suspension, you will never go back. So I hope this video is helpful. I hope that broke down kind of how suspension works on a snowmobile, at least on the front end. Let me know if you guys want me to do a suspension setup on the rear or just a sled setup in general. I can give you what I know as far as my expertise. And I'm not an expert, but I've ridden for a long time. I kind of know what I like to do with my sled. And now that I've got this upgraded front suspension, I get to play with it some more. And if you guys are wondering too, I also have the Ice Age Elevate spindles and I have the Ice Age rails on my sled, which also change handling with the sled in general too. And I'm running a 165 turbo. So power, suspension, spindles, a lot of things go into play. Limiter strap. I can't stress enough how important it is to have a good setup for your riding style. If you guys have different opinions, let me know in the comments. If you guys feel like, you know, the things that Skidoo, Polaris, Arctic Cat even has an aftermarket now, or an upgraded suspension you can buy from them for the new Catalyst chassis. Go do your own research. Figure out what guys are saying. Figure out what suspension you want. Do you want Öhlins? Do you want Raptors? Do you want Fox? What do you want? It's up to you guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give me a like. Subscribe if you haven't for more content like this, and we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks.
Yeah.